Who remembers when a family pie bought from the local bakery actually fed a family of 4, with thick wedges left over for lunch the next day? You'd cut through a golden, flaky crust that snapped under the knife, revealing a dense, dark gravy brimming with tender, recognizable chunks of local beef. Whether it was the Friday night takeaway wrapped in paper that went see-through with grease, or a cold winter comfort meal, you knew precisely what you were eating without needing a magnifying glass to decipher a chemical label. If you buy a commercial meat pie from an Australian supermarket or service station today, what lands in your paper bag is closer to a lukewarm, mystery meat sponge than a genuine icon of Aussie comfort food. Over the next 20 minutes, you are going to find out the disturbing truth about what multinational food corporations have done to Australia's favourite quick meal. I will show you how boardrooms and food scientists systematically re-engineered iconic Aussie staples to maximise profit margins while quietly slashing real meat content. We will crack open the current ingredient decks, laboratory analyses, consumer watchdog reports, and food standards documentation across the country's most popular pie brands sitting in Coles, Woolworths, and ALDI. By the end of this video, you will know exactly which legacy brands are living entirely on borrowed nostalgia, which ones are feeding you modified starch and water disguised as beef, and most importantly, the handful of honest Australian bakeries still crafting real, uncompromised pies that deserve your hard-earned dollars. Stick around until the breakdown of our bottom-ranked items, because the brand sitting at the very bottom of the quality pile is one of the most trusted, highly advertised names in Australian food history. To understand how a staple of Australian culture turned into an industrial illusion, you first have to understand the basic mechanics of commercial pie production. Food Standards Australia New Zealand, or FSANZ, sets the legal definition for a meat pie in this country. Under Standard 2.2.1, a product labelled as a meat pie must contain a minimum of 25% meat flesh. Read that number again, a quarter. That means 3/4 of what you are eating can legally be whatever the factory decides to put in there. Food processors treat that 25% figure not as a bare minimum safety flaw, but as an absolute maximum target to avoid exceeding. Every extra gram of real meat cuts directly into corporate margins, so automated lines are calibrated to hit that quarter threshold with surgical precision. So what fills the remaining 75% of your pie? Water is almost always the true primary ingredient by total weight, bound into a thick gel using modified maize starch, tapioca starch, or wheat flour. To give this watery paste the colour and mouthfeel of a rich, slow-cooked gravy, manufacturers add caramel colourings, hydrolyzed vegetable protein, thickeners, and heavy doses of salt. Instead of natural beef fat or butter, commercial pie pastry is routinely constructed with cheap vegetable shortenings, palm oil, and emulsifiers designed to withstand months of deep-freeze storage without falling apart. To make an anonymous grey paste taste like a savoury beef stew, food technologists reach for chemical flavour enhancers like monosodium glutamate or disodium 5-ribonucleotides. These compounds trick your brain's umami receptors into sensing a rich, meaty depth that simply does not exist in the actual tray. To improve dough elasticity and speed up high-volume industrial baking, factories often introduce flour treatment agents like L-cysteine hydrochloride, an additive historically sourced from processed biological fibers like duck feathers. While completely legal and deemed safe by regulators, these industrial shortcuts illustrate just how far factory food has drifted from a baker rolling out dough with flour on his hands. When corporate conglomerates buy up beloved regional bakeries, accountants immediately scrutinize the ingredient lists to replace expensive animal protein with water and starch. They retain the heritage packaging, the classic typography, and the nostalgic slogans, betting that you will buy out of sheer habit without ever turning the box around. The system relies entirely on your trust and your nostalgia to sell you a cheap industrial derivative. Now that you know the basic tricks of the trade, let's break down the specific brands sitting in Australian freezers right now that are taking you for a ride. Now that you know how the industry operates, let's pull back the curtain on 9 of Australia's most prominent meat pie brands found in the freezer aisles and hot displays of Woolworths, Coles, ALDI, and local service stations. These are the pies living off reputations built decades ago, relying on familiar branding while the ingredients inside tell a very different story. Starting at number 9, we have the Village Bakery Beef Pie, a staple found across Woolworths stores nationally. Owned by George Weston Foods, a massive division of Associated British Foods, this brand presents itself as a wholesome, traditional bakery option. But turn the box over and read the panel. Water is listed as the primary ingredient by weight, while Australian beef sits at a modest 25%, barely touching the legal minimum threshold set by Food Standards Australia New Zealand. The remaining volume is constructed with thickener 1422, hydrolyzed vegetable protein, and mineral salts to simulate a rich gravy. When you slice into one, you get a spongy, highly homogenized filling suspended in a slick, gelatinous sauce that turns watery if heated a minute too long. At roughly $2 per pie, it is cheap, but you are effectively paying for thickened tap water and wheat flour. Choice consumer reviews frequently note that the filling lacks distinct meat chunks, describing it as a smooth, salty mince paste. It is a textbook example of a budget supermarket line engineered to hit a price point by stretching real meat as far as physics and food law allow. Moving to number 8, the Mrs. Mac's famous beef pie. Built on a rich Western Australian history dating back to 1954, Mrs. Mac's spent decades building brand loyalty under the iconic banner of, "If it's a Mrs. Mac's, leave it on." Today, the brand is owned by the massive food conglomerate Aussie Group, and while their marketing emphasizes 100% Australian beef, the actual meat proportion in their standard beef pie lingers right around 25 to 26%. The true substance of the filling comes from water, wheat flour, modified starch, and a suite of flavor enhancers. Longtime tradies and footy fans who grew up buying these from petrol stations notice a clear shift from the rustic, chunky fillings of the past. The interior is now a dark, uniform gravy with fine, anonymous minced beef that offers almost no structural resistance when bitten. You pay close to $4 for a single hot pie at a servo, which translates to a massive markup for a product that is mostly water and starch. Food science auditors point out that Mrs. Mac's relies heavily on caramelized sugar and yeast extracts to provide the dark color and deep savory note that slow-cooked meat broth used to provide naturally. It is a heritage brand riding high on petrol station convenience, selling nostalgia wrapped in golden short crust. At number 7, we find the Elmsbury beef pies, sold exclusively through ALDI. Manufactured as a private label item to keep costs low, Elmsbury captures budget-conscious shoppers looking for cheap family packs. Retailing at around $5 for a 4-pack, the price is undeniably appealing. However, the breakdown reveals why it is so cheap. Meat content strictly hovers at the absolute minimum legal requirement of 25%, with water, wheat flour, and thickeners taking up the lion's share of the volume. The gravy relies heavily on sodium levels exceeding 450 milligrams per 100 grams, using salt and artificial seasonings to compensate for the sparse distribution of protein. When baked, the bottom pastry frequently absorbs the watery moisture from the filling, turning into a soggy, doughy layer rather than a firm base. Reviewers on Australian shopping forums regularly describe the filling as a salty brown slurry with sparse specks of meat. It fulfills the technical requirement of a meat pie on paper, but in practice, it is an exercise in extreme cost engineering designed to meet ALDI's low price mandate. If you are already cringing at what is hiding under those pastry lids, hit that subscribe button right now, because as we push deeper into Australia's biggest household names, the industrial shortcuts only get more glaring. Ranking at number 6 is the Herbert Adams slow-cooked chunky beef pie. Positioned as a gourmet step-up option in Woolworths and Coles, Herbert Adams carries a premium reputation and a higher price tag of around $8 for a 2-pack. Owned by Patty's Foods, the dominant giant in the Australian frozen savoury market, the brand uses terms like slow-cooked and gourmet to justify its cost. While the meat content is slightly higher than baseline value pies, hovering around 28 to 30%, the ingredient list reveals that modified tapioca starch, canola oil, and vegetable protein are still used extensively to bulk out the gravy. You are paying significantly more per serve, expecting a butcher-quality filling, but you are still encountering a mass-produced product where flavor enhancers and thickeners carry the load. Independent food reviews highlight that despite the claims of chunky beef, a substantial portion of the interior is a thickened, heavy gravy designed to fill space inside the pastry shell. The glossy black packaging gives the illusion of artisanal craft, but the factory mechanics underneath remain firmly industrial. At number 5 sits another iconic giant, 4 and 20 classic meat pie. Known universally as the official pie of the AFL and a staple of Australian sporting culture, 4 and 20 is the flagship brand of Patty's Foods. The brand's identity is woven into the very fabric of weekend footy, making it almost immune to criticism among loyal buyers. Yet a cold look at the label tells a stark story. The meat content sits right at the bare regulatory line of 25%. Water, wheat flour, and modified starches dominate the recipe, accompanied by colour 150C to give the illusion of rich beef stock. When eaten hot at the footy or heated in a microwave at home, the texture is famously uniform, a thick, salty brown paste with finely ground meat fragments that require zero chewing. At stadium pricing, fans pay up to $8 or $9 for a product that costs pennies to manufacture in automated facilities in Victoria. Choice investigations into frozen savory foods have repeatedly pointed out that stadium-style iconic pies rely on massive salt content and artificial colorings to maintain consistency across millions of units. 4 in 20 is a masterclass in emotional branding, selling a nation its own sports nostalgia, wrapped in a pastry case that is 3/4 filler. Number 4 brings us to the Garlow's Pies beef pie. Originating as a boutique family bakery in Sydney in 2001, Garlow's expanded rapidly into major supermarket chains across New South Wales and Queensland. The brand built its reputation on producing thin pastry and more meat, positioning itself as a direct antidote to corporate machine pies. However, as production scaled up to meet the massive supply demands of Woolworths and Coles, the commercial realities of industrial distribution set in. While Garlow's maintains a respectable meat content slightly higher than basic budget pies, recent label reviews show the increasing presence of vegetable gums, thickeners, and starch complexes to stabilise the gravy for extended shelf life. Long-time Sydney customers who frequented the original shop often expressed disappointment online, noting that the supermarket version lacks the generous, hand-filled feel of the early days. The price sits firmly in the mid to high bracket, making the inclusion of standard industrial thickeners harder to swallow for a brand that built its name on anti-factory principles. At number 3, we look at the Coles Bakery fresh beef pie from the in-store deli section. Marketed as freshly baked today, these pies give consumers the impression that a baker in a white apron prepared them from scratch behind the counter that morning. In reality, these are mass-produced, frozen, pre-baked shells shipped in bulk to supermarket stores from centralized manufacturing hubs, then simply reheated or finished off in store ovens. The ingredient list, available on request or on pre-packaged multi-packs, reveals the same industrial DNA as frozen box brands: 25% beef, water as the primary component, soy protein fillers, and food acid 330 to regulate stability. The freshly baked illusion allows supermarkets to charge a premium for a pie that was actually manufactured months earlier in an automated factory. The bottom crust often turns rubbery under display heat lamps, while the gravy separates into a clear liquid and a gelled paste if left sitting for too long. It is an operational trick that substitutes store-level heating for genuine baking, deceiving time-poor shoppers searching for a real bakery experience. Number 2 on our list is the Sargent's Classic Meat Pie. Tracing its origins back to 1891 in Sydney, Sargent's is one of the oldest active pie brands in Australia, historically famous for supporting local charities through its trust. Today, the brand is widely available in supermarket freezers as a value option. The label reveals a stark reality. Beef percentage sits at 25%, with water listed as the primary ingredient. The gravy utilizes hydrolyzed vegetable protein, thickener 1422, and caramel color to simulate depth. Consumer feedback across review platforms paints a consistent picture of a pie that has suffered from continuous cost engineering over the decades. The pastry is thick and heavy to prevent structural failure, meaning you spend a significant portion of every bite chewing through plain, unbuttered flour dough before reaching a modest pocket of mince-flavored gravy. At a budget price point, it avoids the high margins of stadium brands, but it embodies the slow, quiet erosion of quality that turns a 19th century baking legacy into a standard supermarket filler dot. Finally, at number 1, we reach the ultimate disappointment in the Australian pie ecosystem, the Paddy's Party Pies Original Multi-Pack. As the foundational product of Paddy's Foods, the ultimate mega corporation of Australian savoury pastry, these bite-sized pies are a staple of kids' birthday parties, grand final gatherings, and office catering trays across the country. Because of their small size, consumers rarely stop to read the back panel. But when you scale down the pie, the ratio of pastry to meat becomes absurdly skewed. The beef content sits at the absolute legal minimum, surrounded by a thick, doughy crust designed to hold its shape on platter trays. The interior is almost exclusively a dark, heavily salted starch gel with minute flecks of processed meat. Independent nutritional breakdowns reveal elevated sodium levels per bite, using heavy seasoning to make a tiny dollop of gelatinous gravy taste rich. It is the highest volume, most pervasive pie product in Australia, sold in huge plastic bags at Woolworths and Coles, representing the absolute peak of industrial efficiency over culinary substance. Millions of Australians buy them every year out of convenience, feeding generations of kids a product that is mostly baked flour, salt, and water. Right, Here comes the part that made watching this far worth it. We have dragged the industrial corporate tricks out into the open, exposed the water-bound starch gels, and dissected the quarter-meat loopholes dominating your supermarket freezer aisle. Now it is time for the antidote. Contrary to what the boardroom accountants want you to believe, true Australian pie baking is not dead. There are still dedicated, uncompromised bakeries producing real, delicious, richly packed pies that honour the classic Aussie tradition. You just need to know where to look and what to demand on the label dot. Starting off our recommendations at the most accessible and affordable end is the ALDI Killarney Heights Chunky Beef Pie Family Pack. Retailing at roughly $6 for a 2-pack, this is proof that buying through a discount supermarket does not mean settling for industrial slurry. Manufactured with Australian beef, Killarney Heights pushes the meat content well above 30%, featuring distinct, recognisable chunks of slow-cooked steak suspended in a savoury, well-seasoned stock. Instead of relying on aggressive sodium levels or chemical MSG to fake an umami hit, the gravy utilises natural onion, garlic, and simmered beef juices. The short crust base holds its structural integrity under heat without becoming a soggy sponge, topped with a crisp, golden puff pastry lid. It is an exceptionally affordable option for families who want a quick, midweek dinner without feeding their kids modified cornstarch and anonymous grey paste. Moving up to a nationwide staple available in almost every Woolworths and Coles across the country, we have National Pies Classic Beef. Hailing from Hobart, Tasmania, where they have been baking since 1942, National Pies remains an independent, family-owned Tasmanian operation. Their signature 180-gram beef pie uses 100% grass-fed Tasmanian beef, with an actual meat content sitting comfortably around 30 to 32%, significantly higher than the legal bare minimum clung to by its major mainland rivals. When you cut open a National Pie, you immediately notice the difference. The filling consists of coarsely ground mince that provides a distinct, satisfying chew, held together by a rich, naturally thickened gravy. Their unique square shape is not just a marketing gimmick, it ensures even heat distribution during baking, creating a sturdy, flaky crust that snaps cleanly. At around $4 for a single fresh pie or $10 for a multi-pack, it costs slightly more than value brands, but every extra cent goes directly into real Tasmanian beef and traditional pastry, rather than slick corporate marketing. For those looking for a true gourmet experience in the chiller section, Ivan's Chunky Angus Beef Pie is an absolute standout. Available in select Woolworths stores, IGA independent supermarkets, and high-end delis, Ivan's operates out of Victoria with an obsessive focus on traditional baking craft. Containing 30% premium Australian Angus beef, this pie does not hide behind minced paste. Opening the pie reveals generous, tender cubes of real braised steak mixed with diced onion, celery, carrots, and a rich, dark beef stock reduction. The bottom casing is a thick, buttery short crust that cuts cleanly with a fork, while the top lid is made with genuine puff pastry that rises high and flaky in your oven. Retailing at around $7 to $8 per pie, it sits at a higher price point, but it delivers a dining experience that rivals an artisanal country bakery. Food testers and local culinary judges consistently rate Ivan's among the finest packaged pies in the country because the ingredient list reads like a real kitchen recipe rather than a chemistry experiment. Finally, at the absolute top tier of commercial baking integrity, we have the legendary Black Forest Bakery Chunky Beef Pie, distributed through Harris Farm Markets, independent IGAs, and premium butcher shops across Australia. Black Forest represents the gold standard of what a packaged pie should be. They utilise slow-braised, pasture-fed beef cuts cooked for hours until tender, pushing total beef content toward 35%. The filling is brimming with thick, tender meat chunks wrapped in an uncompromised, rich gravy seasoned with natural herbs, real cracked black pepper, and simmered bone stock. The pastry uses real butter and high-grade flour, producing a rich, fragrant, golden crust that snaps under the knife. At $8 to $9 per pie, it is undeniably a premium investment. However, when you compare the price of a single Black Forest pie to a hollow $9 servo pie at half-time, the value proposition is night and day. You are paying for genuine culinary craft, high-grade animal protein, and zero cheap fillers. Every single one of these four options proves that we do not have to accept corporate cost-cutting as the status quo. Whether you are shopping on a tight budget at ALDI, picking up a daily lunch at Woolies, or treating yourself at a local Harris farm, there is an honest, high-quality Australian pie ready to replace the industrial imitations in your basket. To protect your wallet and your dinner table from industrial deception, here are 5 non-negotiable rules for buying meat pies in Australian supermarkets. Rule 1. Turn the box over and locate the percentage of beef or meat flesh listed in the nutritional panel. If that number sits at or below 25%, leave it in the freezer aisle because you are paying premium meat prices for thickened tap water. Rule 2. Inspect the order of the ingredient deck. If water, wheat flour or potato appears before the meat, the factory is using starches and liquids to build the volume of your pie. Rule 3. Look closely at the fat sources used in the dough. Quality bakeries utilize genuine butter, beef tallow or lard, whereas mass-market industrial lines rely on cheap palm oil, hydrogenated vegetable shortening, and emulsifiers to survive long freeze cycles. Rule 4. Scan the label for heavy artificial flavor boosters like monosodium glutamate, disodium 5-ribonucleotides, or caramel color 150C. These chemical additions are red flags, indicating that the gravy lacks real simmered meat stock and relies on lab-made seasoning to trick your taste buds. Rule 5. Check for certification logos like 100% Australian grass-fed beef, which legally hold manufacturers accountable to higher sourcing standards. At the end of the day, corporate food manufacturers produce low-grade, water-heavy pies because millions of time-poor Australians continue to buy them out of sheer habit and nostalgic loyalty. Corporate boardrooms cut costs millimetre by millimetre, trusting that as long as the familiar logo remains on the front of the box, shoppers will never read the fine print on the back. Stopping this slow decline in food quality requires a simple shift in mindset. Stop treating heritage packaging as a guarantee of quality and start treating every supermarket purchase as a vote for higher standards. When you refuse to spend your money on starch-filled industrial shells and actively choose honest local producers, you force the giant brand owners to upgrade their recipes or lose their shelf space entirely. Thank you for spending your time with us today. If this investigation opened your eyes, share this video with a mate who still grabs their weekend pies out of habit from the local servo. I want to hear from you in the comments below. Which pie brand on tonight's avoid list is sitting in your freezer right now? And which local Aussie bakery deserves a shout out in our next video? Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because next week we are taking a deep dive into the hidden additives inside Australia's favourite supermarket sausages. Read your labels, back the real Australian bakers,